All right, we've hit the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Some quick housekeeping notes before we dive into today's presentation. If you do have questions about any of the content as we move through the presentation, please do use the Q&A chat window to enter those questions to make sure that we catch those. Cassie will be monitoring the chat, so if you put something there, hopefully we catch it. But if you want to make sure your question is answered, please use the Q&A option. That way we are sure to see it. I want to thank Patrick Polly for joining me today. I'm going to start off with an overview of the topics. If you caught our last webinar for wastewater treatment plants and preparing for harsh weather, a lot of this material is going to be familiar to you. But then Patrick is going to provide a case study of actually using some of these resources to evaluate a waste or a water treatment facility. So thank you, Pat, for joining me today. To get into our presentation, again, I'm going to provide just an introduction to our program and preparing for harsh weather. As far as who we are here at CDAC, we are an applied research program housed at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign's campus. We assist buildings and communities in achieving energy efficiency, saving money, and becoming more sustainable with an overall goal to help reduce the energy footprint in Illinois and beyond. We do that through helping facilities become more energy efficient through education and research and advocating for a sustainable future. This program specifically in our office is a partnership with the Illinois EPA Office of Energy. We thank them for their support of this program. Through this program, we bring no-cost energy assessments to publicly owned water and wastewater treatment facilities. As part of that program, we provide a comprehensive report listing your existing facility conditions, energy benchmarking, potential upgrades and the cost of those upgrades, and also any applicable incentives and funding opportunities connected to those recommendations in those reports. Another component of our program are webinars and workshops like today's, where we provide continuing education credits. If you're waiting for those, usually we have those out the afternoon after our webinar to you, and Cassie will be working on that. So thank you, Cassie, for your help with the continuing education credits. If you are interested in an assessment or signing up for any of our future webinars, please do sign up at smartenergy.illinois.edu/water. So why complete an assessment? If you've got an older existing plant, our focus is on finding opportunities to improve existing processes over past practices and identifying technologies and best practices that might be beneficial for you. We can help you plan for capital improvements and uncover possibilities. We also provide third-party support for wastewater and water treatment plant personnel's ideas to help them move forward with projects and identify funding that they've been wanting to implement for a while. What if you've got a new plant or it's recently been upgraded? Budgets are tight. Things always kind of get budgeted out and left on the table. Scopes can be limited to certain areas. Maybe there's other areas of the facility that didn't get addressed. So we can always help identify those things and help for future planning. Or we, as a research institution, we are also always keeping an ear to the ground for new technologies and process improvements, and we can help connect you to those as well. And another big thing is we can always help connect you to funding opportunities. So how to apply for an assessment? You can go to our website, smartenergy.illinois.edu/water. You must be located in Illinois and be publicly owned. Our initial application form is essentially just a permission form that says you're going to let us come out on the site, you're going to share data with us, and you're going to share that final report with the EPA Office of Energy. We do stress it's a non-regulatory report, so if we identify anything as we're walking through your facilities, it's not going to lead to any kind of issues. It's just a way for us to track our program effectiveness for doing and performing these assessments and to help ensure that our program is providing the services that you need. Once we get that initial application form for you, then we schedule a short call. Usually takes 20 minutes to 30 minutes or so to go over some facility details that will help us prepare for the site visit by knowing what processes you have in place and what equipment we can expect to run across. Then the trickiest part is usually gathering your utility data. We try to gather 2 years of energy and flow data. That way, if there is an anomaly in one year, we've got another year to compare to. Um, if you're on Ameren or ComEd, that's usually pretty easy. As long as you provide us an account number, we can pull that data ourselves directly from those utilities. However, if you're on a co-op or you have non-Ameren gas, um, many people up north are on Peoples, North Shore, um, one of those other gas companies. Um, they don't have an online ready access way for us to pull that utility data. So we would have to work with someone at the plant or your city clerk, whoever is managing the bills to gather those 2 years of bill history. Um, if you're a wastewater plant, we can pull the DMRs for you. For water plants, we don't have a centralized database for those, so we do also need to work with the operator to pull the flows for the water treatment plant. That way we can do our initial energy benchmarking, which you can see an example of on the screen. We usually do a time series chart so we can identify any trends over the past couple of years. And then we do an energy intensity benchmark that we'll include in the report. And as an initial step at our site visit, where we will discuss what that initial benchmarking seems to indicate to us about your facility, how efficient it is, and what opportunities might be available. Then we'll set up the site visit for you. Once we have all that information pulled together, our site visits are typically 1 to 2.5 hours, depending on the complexity of your plant and the size. Usually there's a couple of us that will come out on site, and we're going to be taking a lot of pictures. We're going to be documenting nameplates, process set points, the condition of equipment, things like that. That way we can prepare all that information for the report. The more information we can get, the more accurate our assessment is going to be for you. We're going to ask staff about their experiences with equipment, any maintenance issues, and any desired upgrades. That way we can tune that report to what you really want to see for your facility. But getting into today's topic about how weather hazards and utility impacts. So harsh weather is on the increase. People have noticed over the past couple of years. And in our last presentation in particular, Dr. Trent Ford, the state climatologist, presented some excellent information. If you want to go back to that presentation from last month, it is on our website. But weather patterns are shifting to more frequent occurrences of more extreme weather events. So heavy precipitation, 100-year storm events are happening a little bit more frequently than that. Brief but intense droughts. So even though on the overall in the Midwest, weather is getting wetter, in those periods when it is dry, it is more intense and can lead to short-term, more intense droughts. Heavier winds, tornado events in the wintertime, more snow and ice. So the way these impact water treatment facilities, if you're on surface water, those heavy rain events are flushing more contaminants into our waterways and lakes. For people that are pulling groundwater, short-term droughts can impact shallower wells where maybe you can't pull from certain wells that are in your collection system. Plants are often near lake shores or rivers that are now in floodplain and at risk of flooding. Utility disruptions due to wind, tornadoes, and storm events. And so there's a focus here on developing emergency planning and responses to these events and having better preparation overall. So specifically to water treatment facilities, again, as we noted before, surface water contamination, you're flushing a lot of chemicals, sediments, materials into those surface waters can lead to more hazardous algal blooms. You've got more nutrients and chemicals, oils, and things like that getting washed in the water as well. Increased flooding risk if you're in a floodplain area. Drought conditions, dry wells, rationing at reservoirs, things like that. Also similar to heavy rains, putting more contaminants into the water, drought can increase the concentrations of those contaminants in ground and surface water. Wind power or wind can cause losses of power that can interrupt facilities if you don't have adequate backup power generation, and can even damage the facilities themselves in the case of tornadoes or downbursts, heavy wind events. We were actually just at a site visit not too long ago that had some wind damage to their facilities. Extreme temperatures can also impact power. Higher temperatures in the summertime can lead to brownouts of the grid. Um, in the wintertime, colder temperatures and snap freezes can lead to freeze damage to pipes, both in facilities and we've seen some areas out in the communities where pipes in the ground can also have freeze damage issues. So these are all concerns to be aware of. Some solutions that we're seeing in our communities. The Chicago metropolitan area planning uh, has started instituting green infrastructure, um, implementing rainwater storage through green roofs, rainwater storage tanks, and implementing permeable paving surfaces to allow that rainwater to soak into the ground instead of running off into storm sewers or other areas. Uh, when properly implemented, some green infrastructure can also help filter out pollutants from that runoff so that when it does get into the storm sewer, there's not as many contaminants in it. Um, Other things for wastewater treatment plants is looking at alternative water sources. So we've seen one of the big reports has come out for Joliet, Illinois. They partnered with MWRD and the UIC Freshwater Lab to look at a dual water pipeline. Um, Joliet's contracted with the city of Chicago to get Lake Michigan water. Um, but this dual pipeline study is also looking at ways to offset potable water use through a dual water pipeline that connects treated wastewater to an industrial service pipeline that can serve for irrigation needs, industrial cooling, and other kind of non-potable uses of potable water. Um, to reduce the demand on their existing groundwater infrastructure and reduce how much they need to pull from that Lake Michigan pipeline once it gets installed. Um, the reason this is an attractive project is it's going to use those existing easements, so it limits the infrastructure cost to install that pipeline, even though it's going to span over 30 miles. Um, and really, they're just looking to supplement their water sources um, and looking at alternative uses and reuse of water to limit that demand for new freshwater resources. So now to get into some of the resources that are available to look into resilience options for your water systems. Again, if you were at our last webinar on wastewater, these are a lot of the same resources that are available. Um, the first one we're going to talk about is PNNL's Technical Resilience Navigator. This is an interview question format online tool to gather information from water plant operators on critical functions at your facilities, such as materials purchases, chemicals, things like that, maintenance cycles on equipment, what utilities service your facility, and core processes, and identifies how long a critical function can be down before it creates an unacceptable interruption to your services. If pumps shut down for a little bit, but you've got a water tower or storage tanks on site that can maintain pressure in the system for a little bit, you've got a little bit of time before you have to get those pumps back up and running. So it's identifying things like that where you've got, if an interruption in a service occurs, but you've got on-site storage or um, warehousing of chemicals, things like that. How long can that interruption last before it causes an issue that's going to impact the quality of your service? Um, the interview is also going to gather information on redundancies that exist to mitigate interruptions, such as do you have a backup power generator? Do you have storage on site? Do you have alternative suppliers if there's an interruption from one supplier? Um, and then it's going to document water and energy resource requirements to help size resilient solutions. Do you need a second connection to the grid in case one section goes down? You still got an alternative supply source. Do you need a battery backup system or additional water storage tanks or clear wells, things like that? Um, the way this works is first you have to identify hazards and group them into the source of the hazard and how likely that hazard is to occur. Um, for certain hazards, such as things that impact power, Wind power can knock out the power. A car crashing into a light pole can knock out the power. And squirrels chewing on a line could knock out power. There's a number of different things that could happen. You can group those all together into a grouped hazard, and then provide an overall likelihood that that might happen once a year, 3 times a year, once in 100 years. Um, so that's kind of the initial step of the process, is figuring out how often a particular interruption might occur. Certain other hazards will be grouped into what's called a dual impact hazard, where the hazard will impact both off-site things like a flood can interrupt power, can also interrupt deliveries coming to the plant. Um, and then also can have on-site equipment damage and interruption of services at your facility. So like a flood can knock out power and also eliminate access to certain facilities because they're flooded. Wind power can knock out grid power to your facility, can also damage facilities at the site, like could take shingles off the roof, things like that. Um, those hazards are then assessed by their potential frequency and at various intensity levels. And those identified hazards and frequencies are fed into the next step, which is the vulnerability analysis. So this is, again, another series of questions and kind of an interview format in the program um, that look at, for the redundancies that you have at your plant. You have backup power, you have on-site storage, things like that. Applying those to those hazards, do they provide adequate backup to your system? And so what you're seeing at the charts here is the first three, A through C. The blue line is the interruption. The little gray bars are different key um, points in time, such as the backup system starts up. Um, One of them is there's a tolerable outage duration, which is like if power were to go out, you didn't have pumping, but you've got stored water in water towers, how long until those towers hit a critical low level and you don't have adequate pressure in your system. Um, so it kind of maps those things out and creates a chart. And as long as there isn't an intolerable break um, in the function of your facility, um, then the system's not going to identify an issue. But in the last case here, in the bottom right corner, an unqualified system, if it takes too long to back up your system before an interruption occurs, or your backup system runs, in this case, it's the case of a generator system, if it runs out of fuel and can't maintain powering your plant through the end of an outage, then you're going to have an interruption that's not acceptable. And so you need to identify ways to correct that. Um, what the Resilience Navigator then does is has you assign weighting factors to these things. How critical are they to your facility? You know, interruption to pumping is going to be more critical than interruption to office equipment and power supply. Um, and so you can apply weighting factors to these things and use them to then create prioritized lists of corrective actions and help you um, address the most critical issues first through an identification process. But this is a lot in this program of institutional knowledge that has to go into identifying the hazards and identifying the backup systems currently in place and the criticality of individual components of your operations. The next thing we wanted to go through was the US EPA Resilient Strategies Guide. So this is more like a checklist system instead of an interview type process where they have pre-populated lists of a lot of different things. You can start out looking specifically at a wastewater plant or a water treatment plant, and that categorizes the list of initial priorities. As you go through and select the priorities in the first section of this checklist, it filters out some of the things in the assets checklist. And so as you work through each list, they're being adjusted according to your selections in the previous chain of items. So in this case, it's going to ask you to select your state, population size, um, and type of treatment works. And then it's going to walk you through a list of priorities first, what things are critical for you to identify, as issues and potential improvements. Then it's going to take you into a list of potential assets that can be affected by those priorities. Um, that could include buildings, SCADA systems, your collection systems, power supplies, water sources, things like that. Um, then that guide is going to walk you through a list of potential correction strategies. Um, these strategies can be sorted by kind of a relative cost. They've got a kind of a $3 sign system there that indicates whether it's a low, medium, or high cost strategy to implement. You can sort it by categories. That way, there's a lot of items in these lists that can help narrow them down into something that's a little bit easier to process and work your way through instead of looking at the entire list all at once. And finally, it's going to connect you to funding resources and monetary streams to help implement those strategies. Um, and so again, this can be a way to work through a list of potential all the way from issues to corrective strategies and then identify ways to fund those strategies. Um, the last thing, which I believe Patrick's going to talk a little bit about, is the EPA's CREATE program. This is the Climate Resilience Evaluation and Awareness Resilience Tool. Um, so Milwaukee Waterworks was one of the local kind of regional area case studies that's listed on the CREATE website. Another one is the Region 1 Planning Council, which included North Park and Rockford wastewater treatment plants, where Milwaukee, I believe your CREATE analysis focused on flood threats being right next to the lake. The North Park and Rockford analyses focused more on drought conditions and being prepared for those. And so I will now turn it over to Patrick Polly to talk a little bit about Milwaukee's experience.
Thank you, Sean. Let me share my screen. Good morning, everyone. Patrick Polly, Milwaukee Waterworks Superintendent. I've been with the utility longer than I care to admit, since the early 90s. I've been in administration for the last 6 years, 3 of which as the superintendent. But prior to that, I was an engineer. And I say was an engineer because I do very little engineering anymore. And I think the engineering staff at the utility would probably concur that they no longer consider me an engineering, but I'm an engineer, but I am proud of that fact. So we, as Sean mentioned, we were asked if we were interested in participating in the CREATE program with the EPA. Our DNR reached out to us. I think there was some trepidation on our part, but the process was very helpful overall and practically painless, I would say. And as I was asked to give this presentation, I gave this last August at an in-person seminar at the DuPage Water Commission. And then I provided an abbreviated version in December as part of a webinar. And then, quite honestly, forgot all about this. Quite honestly, it was still in the back of my mind, but there's plenty of other stuff to take over, as you know. So if this gets a little choppy, I apologize. But I'm going to give you some background and then move to the end of the presentation where we talk a little bit about the actual CREATE process. So our mission statement I'll put up here. We developed this a couple of years ago. We talked, about protecting and maintaining, and certainly there's a lot of discussion about resilience. I think 2024 for us was the year of discussing our vulnerabilities because we hosted the Republican National Convention in July, and that meant that we were subject to a lot of questioning from the United States Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, internal requests from our governing body, which is we report up through the mayor, up through the Common Council. And in addition to that, we layered the CREATE experience on top of it. So there was a lot of discussion of our vulnerabilities. But for some background, we've been in existence since the 1870s. We are a publicly owned utility, so we fall under the structure of the city governance, meaning I am appointed by the mayor. We're a division of the Department of Public Works, even though we are a regional water supplier. I think one thing that separates Wisconsin from, I believe, just about every other state in the country is that public water utilities are regulated by a commission. So we are regulated by the Public Service Commission. We are subject to their requirements. Our rates are established by the Public Service Commission. Um, we're we're budgeted for a little over 400 employees. We're staffed to 375 right now. Coming out of COVID, I would have told you that our greatest vulnerability was our staffing. Fortunately, we've made great strides in improving our staffing situation. We had serious staffing issues with our field workers and our treatment plant operations staff. So that's a little bit about our background. Um, as I said, um, we are a regional water supplier, so we supply water to the city of Milwaukee, 5 other retail communities, and then 12 wholesale communities. And you can see our service area off to the right. Our most recent addition was Waukesha, which is the only customer that doesn't border um, Milwaukee in any way. So 950,000 people approximately, 630,000 of those are retail, and then a little over 300,000 wholesale. 2,000 miles of water main, 20,000 hydrants. We're a we're a we're a large system. We pump about 100 million gallons a day, and numerous other facilities outlying. A little bit about our history. I said, since the early 1870s, our first treatment plant went into service in the late 1930s. That's Linwood. It's located right on the lake, and that's the subject of our CREATE experience. We have a second treatment plant located on the south side of the city, a little further inland, that was built to supplement the Linwood capacity. And then in 1998, we added ozone to our treatment plants as a result of the cryptosporidium crisis. So treatment plants, it says here we have a daily system capacity of 380 million gallons. As many utilities that were built out in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that capacity is far more than we currently need. But we do have the ozone disinfection, but traditional filtration process, and then chlorine disinfection and chloramination to result in longer chlorine residuals in the distribution system. And I mentioned a little bit about Linwood and Howard. Their capacities are significant. I think it's important to note that Linwood does have capacity to provide water to our entire service area. Howard does not. Something that we had done back in the 90s as well is added backup power generation to a number of our facilities to ensure that we could continue to provide a minimal level of water service to our entire service area if there was a widespread power outage. So we do have backup power generation. I mentioned Linwood is located on the lake. It is built on filled lake bed. It's a beautiful building. We feel that we've maintained it very well for 85 years plus. It's provided great service to the city of Milwaukee, but as you can see, it is right up against the lake. There's a revetment wall protection, but there is finished water storage on site that is currently non-conforming to DNR standards because the floor elevations of those finished water reservoirs are below the lake level. So this was our primary focus, partly because in early 2020, there was a very severe storm that came through Milwaukee, and the lake levels were at historic highs at that time, and our port flooded. we had water overspill the revetment wall at Linwood. Luckily, it drained away on the ring road, but it did cause some damage to the stormwater system, and it did cause significant concern about what would happen if the lake levels continued to rise and we experienced a similar storm in the future. Fortunately, lake levels have receded significantly since then, but we did fortify the revetment wall at the time, and we did have to upgrade the storm system as well. So those are the key vulnerabilities. Cryptosporidium, some of you may not even be familiar with cryptosporidium. It's interesting to me to note that when we talk to new employees, some of which were born before I even started working for the utility, they don't necessarily remember cryptosporidium, but their families do. And so 30 plus years later, we still have this legacy. We like to feel like we've addressed all the vulnerabilities of cryptosporidium, and we have spent significant amount of money in to upgrade our treatment situation since 1993. The ozone was added, the filter beds were upgraded. We're in the process of remediating all of the filter beds at our Howard treatment plant right now, and then we'll move towards Linwood. We did move the intake on the south side further out into the lake, into deeper water, and we did create a water quality section. In the previous to that, water quality duties were handled by our operations staff. We created a completely separate section to offer an independent point of view on water quality, and it's been obviously a very positive experience, and it's interesting when the perspectives of operations staff vary from water quality, and the fact that you have the ability then to work things out with those two different perspectives and sometimes different priorities. So the other, I mentioned the water quality concern. We are incredibly fortunate to lie on the shores of Lake Michigan and have this stable water source. We have noticed, though, during these high intense storms that the water quality can change rapidly, which requires adjustments by our operations staff. So we did discuss this as part of the create process. We discussed this concern in depth. We were coming off a very mild winter, and the lake temperatures never got all that cold, 23 to 24. So we were worried about water quality in the distribution system with the warmer water, especially in the fall months. These storm events where the lake turns over and it changes temperature rather quickly have been traditionally a challenge for our operations staff. So that was discussed at length with the crew team. And these are some of the general discussions with the crew team that we went through during our sessions. But ultimately, we landed at the flooding issue because that is, I think, the biggest vulnerability and would have the largest impact on our operations. So I mentioned earlier, the create process is relatively painless. I think having their team of resources is of great benefit to you because what they want from you is a little bit of your time, a lot of your expertise. That crew team walks you through the process, talks you through the process, helps you complete the tool. I think some of the sessions were very beneficial. You mentioned earlier the climatologist talk Sean did a month ago, and the incidence of shorter duration, higher intensity storms that we're seeing with climate change and that we're going to continue to see. And that is certainly a concern, not only for our Linwood treatment plant, but for some of our outlying facilities that may lie near waterways or in lower areas. So we had a climatologist come in, talk to us, give us that background for our specific area of the country. Very, very helpful. And then we walk through these working sessions with the modules and talk through our concerns. And I think it's it's hard to talk about vulnerabilities, but it's certainly necessary. And it was what I had told the crew team after the fact was we've had a lot of turnover in our leadership positions of the utility, and all of them bring their expertise, but the chance to talk through in that group with a third party expert on some of the vulnerabilities was incredibly beneficial for our staff to hear the vulnerabilities that water quality worries about versus operations versus engineering versus distribution. That was in some ways even more beneficial than actually working through the Create tool. But we worked through that tool. The EPA team visited us in August. As I mentioned, we then gave the presentation in mid-August. We did walk through these scenarios, and quite honestly, scenario one, relocating the Linwood water purification plant, is a little too big for me to get my arms around. We do own some property inland from the current location that likely has enough area to accommodate a smaller treatment plant. In some ways, that's the easier part of the conversation, is to build a new treatment plant. But I have to tell you, we had conversations about environmental justice. The neighborhood where this property lies in is very close knit. There's conversation about how they would feel about a park being replaced with a treatment plant. But all that being said, relocating the treatment plant and having the crew team be able to provide some expertise on what type of costs would be associated with that was one thing, but then talking through the reorientation or the realignment of our transmission system to accommodate a new location of a treatment plant was a whole different conversation where things do get a little overwhelming, because either the intake needs to be extended, well, the intake would need to be extended, a pumping station would need to be built in order to convey water up to this new location, and then all of the distribution transmission piping would have to be realigned to accommodate this new location. So we did talk through that in depth. We talked through scenario number two, which is to add UV treatment at our two primary pumping stations, which are inland from the treatment plant. This would create a situation where our below grade reservoirs are no longer non-compliant per the DNR. So this would solve that challenge as well as create more resilience. We also then talked about further fortification of the revetment wall and stormwater system. The revetment wall was the initial build of it was fortified in the 90s, I believe, as well. So this wouldn't be the first time we do this, but we would need to further protect that location on the lake. And then scenario three was not necessarily a do nothing scenario, but a basically what we've done to date scenario. We have done revetment wall repairs. We have fortified certain areas of that revetment wall. We have improve the storm drainage system, improve the roadway, just become more aware. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think the most important part is if a utility does have the opportunity to engage with the EPA and the crew team, I would strongly encourage it, because it's not something I think we would have done on our own. Other priorities always seem to find their way onto your list. And this was something that they told us exactly what was needed. They brought their expertise. They asked us to talk through some of these situations with us, and it was a very helpful process.
Thank you, Patrick. That's some good information. I do want to thank Ezra for putting in the chat just a little explanation of who CREW is. It's the EPA's Creating Resilient Water Utilities program. Um, so they have a number of different guides and references and tools on their webpage. The Create tool is one of them. I wonder if you can talk a little bit. One of the things the Create tool does is it can look at um, kind of projections of climate impacts into the future to help prioritize tasks. Can you talk a little bit about how that influenced your decision to focus on the flood issue, or was that um, rather than some of the other potential climate-based issues, or was that more just because that was an already a known factor?
Yeah. So you're describing the situation where you can choose the type of future climate conditions that'll happen.
Hmm.
It, I think because Lake Michigan is so very stable and the water quality is so good that we do have these challenges, but we've been able to address them with the current challenges. And I don't know, we've been able to address them without too much difficulties. As I mentioned earlier, that one of our biggest vulnerabilities was our treatment plant operations staff. We're feeling better about that as that staffing gets better and we get more experience. I think that risk we didn't feel was going to be much more extreme than it currently is, whereas this risk of Lake Michigan water levels fluctuating much quicker than they had historically and going higher and lower, and then these very high intense storms is a much greater vulnerability to us. And so in the Create tool, you can select to help you, I guess, properly assess the risk
Hmm.
that you should be addressing, and then to also determine the costs associated with whatever your solutions are and the payback associated with the solutions. It it's a very extensive tool that offers you the ability to and what they told us is use this tool to start the conversation with your oversight bodies to try to explain to them the risks and the benefits that can be seen if you and your necessity to move forward with solutions. So I don't know that I answered your question, Sean, but that was part of the tool. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I was just curious how much influence the projections of climate impacts had on selecting the projects versus you already had a known recent issue with the flood risk, and so that made that a priority, and the others kind of went to the wayside anyway.
Yeah, I think it was the recent and it was the high intensity storms. I would say that our water quality manager would have been fine analyzing the raw water quality, source water quality concerns rather than the Linwood. I mean,
Mm.
there was conversation about, and then ultimately the crew team says, all right, which one does the utility want to address? And they offered their opinions that the flooding was a more imminent threat.
Mm. Okay. Um, I'm looking through the chat here. Nothing's come into the Q&A as far as questions. Um, and the chat looks like it's been mostly, well, Ezra put another comment in here. It appears the utility can still request direct technical assistance from the EPA around that create tool. Um, also exists for utility to walk through the create tool by itself. I will mention I did reach out to Crew to be a guest speaker for this webinar as well, and they told me that they were not available due to recent federal changes. Um, I'm not sure if that's impacting their support for the program for the Create tool as well. If they're still offering the direct technical assistance, or if it's now the tool and the guides and stuff are available online, but you'll have to work with local engineering firms and your own staff to work through those. Um, I'm not sure on that. I didn't get a clear response, but it is something to be aware of. Um, that some of these programs, as far as direct technical assistance, have been impacted lately um, due to the cuts and things. Um, but Patrick, I want to thank you for your time today. Everyone else, thank you for attending. Hopefully, this has been an informational session for you as we walk through the different available tools and ways to analyze your facilities. If you do have any further questions, feel free to reach out to us here at CDAC. Um, you can email us directly. Let me put that up on the screen real quick. You can email me directly at my email address or call our office. We're more than happy to help walk you through some of these materials as well. Certificates for today's webinar will be sent out tomorrow, along with the CEU course number. So thank you everyone for attending today. Patrick, thank you again for your insights and information. I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.